Christos anesti negrum fanato.
So my work in ethics, I pulled together from a bunch of different sources and just kind of made it one thing, and was just kind of serendipitous. I will say to kind of not so much to repeat the process, but because ethics is the rational investigation of morality. That's how it defines itself. It's like saying the true will investigate the good, or the science will dogma, let's say, will unfold into the technology of behavior or policy or something. But once you see that ethics is the true investigating the good, then you ask yourself, it's also supposed to be showing us the best life. So what does it have to say about the beautiful? How come there's an entire Socratic transcendental missing? And not just missing, but missing in a kind of dishonest way. The very definition of ethics suppresses beauty, out of consideration. That's a problem, and you can make that worse by saying that the true investigating the good is like saying the knowledge of good and evil. So now what is ethics? The serpent trying to get us to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So is there something more to the picture? Of course, on the other hand, we have someone like Elder Porphyrios, in just that general sense of the elders, of saying things like, no one ever became holy by fighting evil. You have to fall in love with Christ, and you have to fall in love and allow divine eros to be inspired within you. So begin with beauty, essentially. And then go back to Jane Jacobs. She said, in our urban planning between 1949 and 1974, we spent all this money trying to fight evil, trying to, wipe out the slums or fight blight or whatever it was. She said it only made things worse in every instance. And she said what you need to do instead is find in a neighborhood what is the life that is there, and try to fan the flames of that life. And in so doing, you will draw other life into being, and then you serve that. And her image of a city was bonfires in a field, and those bonfires are the parts of town that are working, that are alive, almost 24/7, and interesting and vital and diverse. Increase the number of places like that, and then that's how you rebuild your city. Right? So again and again and again, this guy Simon Sinek, or I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but he's a big YouTube guy, and he's always talking about start with why. Again, that's starting with inspiration and the beautiful, and that's how things have to happen spiritually. And then you draw in Orthodox metaphysics and Dionysios and Maximus, and this how did the Lord create the world? By in his love and goodness, he spilled out outside himself, and it was this theophany, and it shone out, and that beauty, non-being itself, was so transfixed by the beauty that it fell in love with it. It was aroused by eros, and it left itself behind. Self-love was defeated, and it came into being. And that's the origin of creation, is beauty first. So you can't have a spiritual life or an ethical life. It's always beauty first. And without that understanding. And then I drew in something from Lars Thunberg. He said that from the 4th century, that East and West diverged in the monastic ranks about whether you should fight sensual sins or intellectual sins first. And the sensual sins means chastity. It means devote yourself to beauty. The intellectual sin says, start with fighting pride or something. So the way of the Orthodox Church has always been beauty first, and that's just the way it is. And this is reality in many situations. It has to do with this whole nature of evil as meondic. It's things which don't fall in love. At this conference, we're talking about secularism, What is secularism? Simply, it's a collapse into self-love, an immanent frame. There's no more transcendence. In other words, there's no more eros. There's nothing that beautiful that would draw us outside of ourselves, that would draw the world outside of itself. So it's the death of eros. It's the death of beauty. It's the positive suppression of those things. That's why sexual sin is such an important part of the sexual project. You've got to pervert eros as much as possible, or people will realize that there's something outside themselves which is more important than themselves, or in which they will find their true life. So hubris is the same thing. It's this failure to discern beauty, failure to see that our virtues are really gifts from God. They're beautiful gifts, even when we've worked hard for them, that they really are theophany. They are participation in Christ's virtue. So yeah, so that's really just one big, puzzle, but it's everything. If you begin with moralism, you're going to last until your first fall, and eventually, you'll flame out. And if you begin with self-analysis, like in the therapy culture, then you'll become further enclosed in the self, and that's the therapy culture has produced, like I said, a shameless people and a democratic people. It's the soul therapy for democracy. It's there's nothing that can make you feel ashamed. I think I was in high school and we were beginning to pray in my Sunday school class in Akron, Ohio, and at the end, Anthony Bloom has those 2 pages about Saint Silouan's deep prayer life. I just loved everything about that little reading. Just his name and the keep thy mind in hell, I think that's in there, just everything about that. And a few years later, when I was a sophomore in college, the future father, Nick Pallas came back from Greece just then to work in Washington, D.C., where I was in school. And he knew all the elders. He knew everyone. And he told me this legend that, is this going to... Anyway, there was a legend. Some people say that in every age, there's one man or woman that's the holiest man on earth, or holiest woman on earth. And when they die, the world is like troubled. And I said, well, who is it now? And he said, a lot of people think it's Father Sophrony. So I said, when I graduate from college, I'm going to go get his blessing, and then I'll start my life. And I did. And so in 1988, I left Ionian Village on a Eurail pass, and I went to England. And it took a couple of months, but I got there in the I guess it was November, late November maybe, and the snows were falling, but they happened to be closing the gates of the monastery just as the day I arrived. So I had an introductory letter from my then spiritual father, an abbot on Mount Athos. So that meant that when the gates shut, I was inside for the next 3 weeks. So there were no visitors allowed except Sundays. And I worked on the grounds. I planted a lot of trees there at that time. And while I was there, the elder's autobiography, We Shall See Him As He Is, came back from the printers for the first time, unloaded it from the truck, and he gave me a copy, and I had several meetings with him to read and discuss it. But the first time I saw him, I was planting a tree right in front of the church there, and I was sort of had my hands in the dirt, and I looked down the walk, and he was walking. I think it was a nun he was leaning on. He was old then. I don't know how old he was, 89, something like that, 90s. And when I looked at him, I looked at him, and in my heart, I laughed, and I said, so that is what a human being looks like. And it was a great moment in my life, because prior to that moment, I had never had a sense that I had not yet seen a human being. The thing about, when you look at Father Sophrony and his writing about his own spiritual father, Saint Silouan, he doesn't he doesn't share the miracles. If you read the long version of St. Silouan the Athonite, you'll see some, like St. Silouan stopped a storm and a dozen fishermen were ready to drown, and he calmed the waves. And but he wanted to tell the story in terms of, that the miracle is the saint, the transfigured human person. And that's certainly been for having a PhD and all that, and it really is, it's really the memory of holy people that keep you on the path to Christ and that let you know the shape of your own judgment. And I think you just have to, we just have to cultivate more eros for Christ and more sensitivity to the Holy Spirit. We need a much finer grained sense of what is a sin. And not to be neurotic about it, but it's the time when our tone of voice is wrong, or the volume of our voice is too low or too high. I think we have to, if we externalize the issue, I think that's contrary to the spirit of the Benedict option. That if you're going to win in a spiritual warfare, you can't wait for the big things. You have to win those little things. And I know you're not gonna, but you have to attend to them. And you have to attend to eros and attend to what holy shame requires of you in its three concentric phases. And you have to warm up your heart and really create an inner life. You cannot pretend that Christ is not at the door knocking. If you just wait for the big things, it's just like hand wringing, and society stinks and it's crushing. I worry about those things too. But it's not. It's not an avenue for anything. It's just not. It doesn't really. The little things are the big things in a way, and they're all you've got. All you've got is that the Lord laid on your heart to apologize, and you didn't, or the Lord laid on your heart to, make a little more effort with the fast this year, and you didn't, and that's an overstatement, but something like that. This thing about beauty first, right? That's what the Jesus prayer is. It's like, no, all my attention, the cure for sensuality is all my attention goes to the name of Christ. And cultivates that love. That's so small, but that's the bread and butter of our most spiritually advanced people. Maybe we can't do that in the world. Maybe our minds are a little frazzled from all this media, but we can have that moment-to-moment attention in other ways. And especially I'd like to say that if we start to lose our peace as we contemplate the sins of other people, then this is, forget it. That's not good. You really can't. We've got to know how to. We got to know how to guard our peace, and that eros and peace. Those are the. Everything else going to come from that, I think. Yeah. Sorry. I just want to apologize for future generations that I dared to talk about anything spiritual, but it was the camera that made me do it, and Herman. Forgive me. Yeah. All right, we're done.
Thank you.